The economy is bad right now. I was not born into a wealthy family. I do not have the right connections. It is not fair that they get everything and I have to struggle. Listen to yourself. Every single day you wake up and you feed yourself a buffet of excuses. You have built an entire identity around the idea that you are a victim of circumstance. You believe that if the world had just been a little kinder, if your parents had been richer, or if the system was not rigged against you, you would be successful. You are waiting for the world to offer you an apology, or for someone to finally recognize how much you have suffered and hand you the success you believe you deserve. You are delusional. Notice how specific this delusion is, because it is not simple laziness. Laziness is honest about itself. This is something more sophisticated. It is a full narrative, built carefully over years, with you cast as the wronged protagonist and the entire world cast as the villain who owes you a debt it has not yet paid. The story has a beginning, the unfair hand you were dealt. It has a middle, every subsequent setback reinterpreted as further proof of the original injustice. And it conveniently never has an ending, because the moment the story ends, you would have to stand in front of a mirror with no one left to blame. That is the actual function of the victim narrative. It is not a description of your circumstances. It is a permanent alibi, renewed daily, for never having to find out what you're capable of. There is a specific reward this narrative offers, and it explains why it is so hard to abandon even once you can see it clearly. As long as the story remains intact, you are protected from the single most frightening possibility available to any human being, trying, genuinely trying, with no excuse left standing between you and the result, and discovering that the result still was not good enough. The victim narrative lets you keep an unfalsified version of your own potential forever, at the cost of never actually testing it. Every person who has ever told you their excuses sound reasonable has, without meaning to, helped you avoid the one experiment that could have told you the truth. You think your pain makes you special. You think your struggle is a badge of honor that excuses your mediocrity. Let me be clear, nobody cares about your excuses. The world does not owe you a chance, it does not owe you a fair start, and it certainly does not owe you a path to victory. The sooner you kill the victim inside of you, the sooner you can start building an empire. Consider how this narrative actually functions day to day, because it rarely announces itself as dramatically as, "I am a victim." It shows up quieter than that. It shows up as the reflexive explanation you reach for the instant something goes wrong, before you have even finished processing what happened. A deal falls through, and before you have asked what you could have done differently, you have already located the external cause. The client was unreasonable, the timing was bad, the market shifted. Some of that may even be true. The problem is the speed and the automaticity of the reach. A person building genuine resilience asks what they could have done first and looks outward only after that question has been honestly answered. A person building a victim identity asks what was done to them first and rarely gets around to the other question at all. To understand what it looks like to be a man who refuses to be broken by circumstances, we must look to the dense, dark jungles of 18th century Java. We are talking about a man named Radin Mased. Before we reach the jungle, it is worth understanding exactly how far this man actually fell, because the scale of the fall is what makes the climb back so instructive. He was not born on the margins, dreaming of a status he never had. He was royalty by blood, born into the high courts of the Javanese aristocracy, at a moment when that world was already fracturing under the weight of internal succession disputes and the growing influence of the Dutch East India Company, which was steadily converting political leverage into direct control over the island's ruling houses. When the political tides turned against his branch of the family, the fall was not gradual. His titles were stripped away, his land was seized. He was cast out, hunted and humiliated by the very relatives who were supposed to protect him. He went, in a matter of what may have been mere months, from a life inside the walls of a royal court to a life with a price on his head, moving through hostile territory with no guaranteed loyalty from anyone he met. It is worth pausing on exactly what this kind of fall does to a person's sense of their own future, because it is not simply financial ruin. A man raised inside a royal court is raised with an entire internal architecture of expectation: who he is, what he is owed, what his life was always going to look like. Losing the title and the land does not just remove comfort. It demolishes the entire mental structure a person has used, since childhood, to understand who they are. Most people, having that structure demolished all at once, spend years trying to rebuild some approximation of the old one, seeking out anyone who might restore even a fraction of what was lost. Raiden Mossad appears to have skipped that stage almost entirely, moving instead toward building something that had never existed before, rather than mourning something that no longer did. If he were a modern man, he would have spent the rest of his life writing miserable posts about how unfair life was, or begging for scraps of sympathy from anyone who would listen. He had, by any reasonable modern standard, every justification in the world to become permanently bitter. Nobody would have blamed him for it. But Raiden Mossad was not a modern man. He was a force of nature. He looked at his exile, his betrayal, and his poverty, and he saw it as a tactical advantage. He realized that when you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous creature on the planet, because every single calculation your enemies rely on to predict and control you assumes you have something left to protect. Take that away, and their entire playbook stops working. He went into the wilderness. He did not go looking for a mentor, a patron, or anyone who could hand him back what he had lost. He went to find the common people, the farmers, the laborers, the outcasts, who were just as angry at the corruption of the elite as he was, and who had every practical reason to distrust a disgraced prince showing up in their villages asking for loyalty. He had to earn that loyalty from nothing, with no title left to command it. He took these men, who were untrained, unorganized, and completely overlooked by every major power on the island, and he molded them into a terrifying, lethal insurgency. Raiden Mossad stood alone against three massive, overwhelming powers. He was hunted by the Dutch East India Company, at that point one of the most powerful commercial and military organizations on the face of the earth, with resources, firearms, and naval reach that dwarfed anything available to a single exiled prince. He was hunted by the Sultanate of Surakarta, and he was hunted by the Sultanate of Yogyakarta, three empires, one man with no land, no title, and no guaranteed ally. For 16 years, he did not just survive, he dominated. He led a guerrilla campaign so precise, so brutal, and so intelligent that the combined forces of the Dutch and the local kingdoms were repeatedly humiliated on ground they should have controlled without contest. He did not have heavy artillery. He did not have modern weaponry, reliable supply lines, or the ability to openly recruit and train an army in daylight. Every advantage on paper belonged to his enemies. What he had instead was a fierce, uncompromising philosophy known as Tiji Tebe, Mati Siji Mati Kabe. It meant that his forces lived and died as one single unit. If one suffered, all suffered. If one prospered, all prospered. There was no officer class insulated from the risk carried by the lowest foot soldier. This was not a slogan. It was the operating system of an army that had nothing but each other, and it produced a level of cohesion that armies fighting for salary and obligation rarely achieve. It is worth understanding why this particular philosophy mattered so much given the specific disadvantage he was working against. A conventional army, fielded by an established power, can absorb the loss of individual units because the institution behind it will simply raise more. Raiden Mossad had no institution behind him. Every warrior who joined his cause had done so voluntarily, often at enormous personal risk, choosing loyalty to a man with no throne over safety under an established ruler. An army built this way collapses instantly the moment its members suspect their sacrifice is not shared equally by their leadership. Resentment among an army of volunteers spreads faster and does more damage than it ever could among conscripts who have nowhere else to go. By binding his own fate absolutely to theirs, refusing any privilege that separated his risk from a common soldier's risk, he built something his wealthier, better supplied enemies structurally could not replicate, an army that had no incentive to defect because there was no better deal being offered anywhere else, and no leader hoarding safety while asking others to bleed for him. He transformed his lack of resources into a source of absolute resilience. He took the pain of being cast out and turned it into the fuel that burned against three empires simultaneously for 16 consecutive years, never fully cornered, never fully broken. He did not win by complaining about his lack of privilege. He won by accepting his reality exactly as it was, owning his struggle without asking anyone to fix it for him, and outworking every single one of his enemies on terrain and terms he had chosen precisely because his enemies underestimated how much a man with nothing left could endure. His enemies had all the money, all the guns, and all the political power. What they did not have, and could not manufacture, was his psychological endurance. Soldiers fighting for a paycheck eventually want to go home. Soldiers fighting because the alternative is watching their entire cause die with them do not. The Dutch and the Sultanates grew tired of bleeding in the jungles for gains that evaporated within weeks. They grew genuinely afraid of the man they themselves had cast out and underestimated. Dutch soldiers gave him a title that echoed through the battlefields for the rest of his campaign: Pangeran Sambernyowo, the Prince of Death, the Soul Catcher. It is worth noticing what a title like that actually represents, coming specifically from the mouths of the men hunting him. An enemy does not invent a name like that for someone they consider a minor nuisance. Names like this get created by soldiers who have watched their own comrades die to a man they were told at the start of the campaign would be easy to crush. A disgraced prince with no land, no formal army, no institutional backing of any kind. Every year that campaign dragged on without a resolution was a year that eroded the confidence of 3 separate ruling powers simultaneously, each of whom had entered the conflict, assuming it would be a brief punitive action against an irrelevant exile. The title was not flattery. It was an admission, repeated by increasingly exhausted enemies, that the calculation they had made about him at the very beginning had been catastrophically wrong. Eventually, the 3 massive powers realized they could never fully destroy him, and worse, that continuing to try was costing them more than simply making peace with him ever would. They were forced to swallow their pride, wave the white flag, and invite the exile, the man they had once stripped of everything and hunted for over a decade, to the negotiating table as an equal. They had to carve out an entirely new principality and hand it to him, simply to make the bleeding stop. He did not ask politely for his royalty back through the same channels that had taken it from him. He reached into the fire with his own bare hands and pulled it out, on terms he had dictated through 16 years of refusing to accept the story that had been written for him. Now, look at the pathetic excuses you whisper to yourself every single day. You complain that your business failed because the market is too saturated. You cry that you cannot get in shape because you do not have the genetics or the time. You blame your boss, your parents, the government, and the economy for your mediocre existence. You have 1,000 justifications, each one individually reasonable sounding, that together form one seamless explanation for why none of this is actually your responsibility. There is a real, well-studied psychological concept underneath this pattern, and it deserves to be named precisely rather than dismissed as simple weakness. Psychologists refer to a person's belief about what controls the outcomes in their life as their locus of control. Someone with a strongly external locus of control genuinely believes, at a deep and often unconscious level, that outcomes in their life are primarily determined by forces outside their influence: luck, other people's decisions, systemic unfairness, circumstances of birth. Someone with a strongly internal locus of control believes that their own decisions and effort are the primary lever, even when external circumstances are genuinely difficult. The research on this is consistent across decades of study. People with a more internal locus of control tend to persist longer through setbacks, take more initiative, and recover faster from failure, not because their circumstances are easier, but because their setbacks get filed under a problem to solve instead of further proof the game was rigged. The external narrative feels true because it usually contains a kernel of real truth. The economy sometimes is bad. Some people genuinely are born into more resourced families. Systems genuinely do have unfair elements built into them. The lie is not in the individual facts. The lie is in what you do with them, treating a real but partial explanation as a complete and permanent verdict on what you are capable of. What makes this concept genuinely useful, rather than just another label, is that locus of control is not a fixed trait you were simply born with and are stuck carrying for life. It functions more like a muscle that atrophies or strengthens based on repeated use. Every single time you catch yourself mid-explanation and consciously ask what portion of this outcome was actually within your control, even in situations where the honest answer is very little, you are exercising the exact mental habit that determines how quickly you recover from the next setback. Raiden Ma said was not born with some genetic advantage and resilience that you were denied. He simply never let the habit of external explanation take root in the first place, at the precise moment in his life when it would have been most understandable to let it. You are deeply in love with your own suffering because it gives you an excuse to be lazy. It is a comfortable, socially defensible place to live because nobody can criticize a victim without looking cruel, and you have learned, whether consciously or not, to use that social immunity as a permanent shield against ever being evaluated on your output. Let me give you a harsh truth that will shatter your fragile worldview. Your disadvantage is your greatest weapon, but you are too cowardly to wield it. When you have no money, you are forced to be creative in ways a well-funded competitor never has to be. When you have no connections, you are forced to become undeniable on merit alone, which builds a kind of credibility that inherited connections never actually produce. When the world takes everything from you, it is, in the exact same motion, giving you the ultimate freedom to build yourself from the ground up, completely unowned by anyone's expectations of who you were supposed to become. This is worth taking literally rather than as a comforting slogan, because it describes a real asymmetry that plays out constantly. A person who inherits an easy path rarely has to develop the specific muscle of finding a way when there does not appear to be one, because that muscle has simply never been required of them. The first time genuine adversity arrives for a person raised entirely inside comfort, it often arrives late, unexpectedly, and without any prior training in how to respond to it. A person who has been improvising their way out of disadvantage since young adulthood has already run that drill dozens of times by the point comfort ever becomes an option, and the muscle is simply there when it is needed, because it has been needed constantly before. Victims wait for someone to save them. Conquerors look at a barren wasteland, a mountain of debt, and a room full of enemies, and they see the foundations of their new empire because they have correctly understood that foundations built on nothing owe nothing to anyone. Picture two people who lose their jobs on the exact same day, in the exact same industry, for the exact same reason. A round of layoffs neither of them saw coming and neither of them caused. The first spends the following months building a detailed, airtight case for why this happened to him. He researches the layoffs, confirms that the industry really is struggling, reads articles about how the job market really is worse than it used to be, and shares all of this, accurately and persuasively, with anyone who will listen. Every fact in his case is true. The problem is what the case is being used for. Every conversation about his situation ends at the explanation, never at a plan, because the explanation has become the entire point. 6 months later, he has become genuinely knowledgeable about exactly why his misfortune was not his fault, and he has not sent out a single application in the last 2 months because a part of him has begun to suspect that applying and getting rejected would threaten the one thing he still has, a fully justified reason to have not tried very hard. The second spends the first week absorbing the exact same shock with the exact same right to feel it. Then she starts making calls, most of which lead nowhere. She takes a lower-paying interim role in an adjacent field within 3 weeks, not because it is what she wants, but because it keeps her moving and gives her new information about a market she no longer fully understands. She is rejected, repeatedly, for roles she was well qualified for reasons that have nothing to do with her ability, bad timing, internal candidates, budget freezes that were decided before she ever applied. None of it is fair. She does not spend energy establishing that it isn't fair, because she has already decided in advance that fairness was never going to be the variable she could control. 6 months later, the interim role has taught her a skill she did not have before. That skill has opened a door the first job never would have, and she is, by pure accumulated motion, in a materially better position than she was the day she was laid off. She did not have an easier 6 months than he did. She simply refused to let an accurate explanation become a permanent occupation. Consider a third example, on a longer timeline, because the pattern compounds the longer it is allowed to run. Two siblings grow up in the same difficult household, with the same absent parent and the same lack of financial support heading into adulthood. Both have an equally legitimate grievance, and both, for a period in their 20s, tell a version of their story that centers entirely on what was taken from them. One sibling never really moves past that period. Every job he loses, every relationship that fails, every financial setback gets folded into the same original narrative, reinforced rather than resolved by each new disappointment, until by his 40s the story has become so total that any success would almost threaten it. Success would mean the deck was not quite as stacked as the story required it to be. The other sibling reaches the same difficult conclusion about her upbringing at roughly the same age, feels the same anger, and then does something specific with it. She uses the anger as a reason to overinvest in the one thing entirely under her own control: skill development, treating every disadvantage as a reason to become disproportionately competent rather than a reason to expect disproportionate accommodation. 20 years later, both siblings can accurately describe the exact same unfair childhood. Only one of them has let it remain the explanation for everything that happened afterward. It is worth pausing here to draw a real distinction, because collapsing all hardship into just an excuse would be its own kind of dishonesty. There is a difference between naming a genuine constraint and hiding inside one. A person recovering from real trauma, real illness, real systemic barriers is not lying when they describe those things. and describing them accurately is not the same as using them as a permanent alibi. The test is not whether the obstacle is real. Almost every obstacle people cite is real to some degree. The test is whether the obstacle is being used to explain a setback or being used to justify never attempting the next step. Raiden Ma'side's exile was completely real. The betrayal was completely real. What separated him from a man who simply had a legitimate grievance was that he never let the legitimacy of the grievance become the entire content of his identity. He mourned it, if he mourned it at all, on his own time, and then he went into the jungle and started recruiting. It is time to kill the victim mentality. Stop asking the universe for a fair fight. Expect the betrayal, expect the hardship, expect the entire system to be rigged against you, and then decide to completely dominate it anyway through sheer unrelenting force of will. Use the disrespect. Use the rejection. Weaponize every single disadvantage they threw at you, the same way a man with nothing left to lose in the jungles of Java turned 3 empires into the very proof of how dangerous he had become. Start with the specific narrative you have been quietly repeating to explain your own stalled progress, the one you have told so many times it now sounds like simple fact rather than a story you chose to keep telling. Ask what portion of it is genuinely, verifiably outside your control, and be honest that the answer is probably smaller than the story implies. Then ask what you have actually attempted in the space that remains. Most people doing this exercise honestly for the first time discover the uncomfortable truth that the space they had already written off as impossible was never actually tested. It was simply assumed to be closed, the same way Raiden Ma'side could have assumed, quite reasonably, that a disgraced prince with a bounty on his head had no realistic path back to power, and chose not to accept that reasonable-sounding assumption anyway. Nobody is coming to save you. Nobody is keeping score of how unfair your particular version of the story has been. Accept the war, claim your crown, and get to work.